Happy Thursday, Xavier Muskie fans. This is your weekly Razor cast. That's Jim Reaker and Jeff Zink talking Muskies basketball. Our last one of the 2017 slate, and we'll be going on to next time with 2018. In the middle of these nice, beautiful winter holidays. How you doing over there, Mr. Reaker?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a great day to be a Muskie fan. 13-1 in the 2017-18 season so far. Got off to a great start in the Big East. Continued the revenge tour. Remember the Golden Eagles of Marquette beat us twice last year. So we're number 6 in the AP, number 5 in the USA Coaches Poll, number 2 RPI, only behind the Duke Blue Devils. And before we get too into it, I'll just say Happy New Year, because it's been a great old one.
They have quite a 2017 for the Muskies, that Elite 8 appearance, and like you say, starting off 13-1, and they're only lost to one of the few teams ranked ahead of them in the nation, the Arizona State Sun Devils. But we're getting to that point though, where the rubber hits the road, as they say, as we're heading into Big East territory, which started last night. We'll get to that in a minute, but before we do that, got to talk about that Northern Iowa game from last week, which another one of those games that if Chris Mack wasn't already bald, would probably be losing his hair about a little closer than he wanted at different times. But the Muskies did pull away at the end to defeat the Panthers by 10.
Well, and here's what's the most positive thing when that game started. As you recall, as we talked last week, remember the game before, J.B. McCura and Kaiser Gates didn't play because they were in concussion protocol, and then we had lost Najee Marshall for the second half of the Marshall game and just held on in that game as the Thundering Herd came thundering back. So the most positive thing to start that game was all three of them were available and ready for 100% action. So as a Musketeer fan, you had to be happy to see that, remembering how injury kind of derailed the season a little bit last year.
Yeah, you like it, but some of the things, and you've got your slate of mid-season questions. We're going to go on a little bit. A little surprising, of course, they are coming back from the break, tied at halftime. Needed to pull away late as those Panthers just weren't going away. You look at it, at some points they were only up 4. Like you look at 3:40 left, the Muskies are only up 4. But again, they did push hard there at the end and win by 10.
Yeah, and but you got to remember, UNI, Northern Iowa, they're a talented team. I believe, I don't have this written down, but if you look back, I believe I know 3 of their losses are Villanova, North Carolina, and Iowa State, actually. And if you look at the Villanova Wildcat game, I believe played on a neutral site in one of those tournaments somewhere, that they only lost to the Wildcats of Villanova, number 1 in the country, by 4 points. So we're actually going into their den, the Panther den up there in Cedar Falls. And how do you get to Cedar Falls anyway?
Oh, now come on now. That's a little bias there. Have you ever been to Iowa?
I've been through it.
It's a beautiful place. Cedar Rapids, Cedar Falls. They call it the Quad Cities there, close on the river. Got some good friends there that will probably give me a call if they're listening and saying, hey, straighten the boy out about what's going on in Iowa. But it's true that a lot of good things that they were able to put together, and you're right, their losses have all been to teams that are high on the list. But again, a game that the Muskies were expected to win and did, and now they were able to end on a high note heading into Big East time, which opened up last night against Marquette.
Yeah, just to end that, they got down early to the Panthers up there. They were down 22-12, 10 points early, but then went on a 10-0 run to tie that game. And as you said, they were actually tied at halftime and just kept grinding it out. Bennett Cook had, I believe, 26 points, for that night. But Chris Mack, who again just surprises me. Not surprise me. That's not the way I want to say this. Impresses me. How he prepares and he sticks to a game plan. What they decided is they were not going to double Bennett Cook which a lot of teams do, because then he gets everybody else involved and opens up some 3-point shots. So he was just going to let his tandem of Sean O'Mara, Tyreek Jones, and Karam Cantor to just play one up on him. And even though he got the 26 points, he did not get anybody else involved, and I think that was the difference in the game. And actually, he ended up fouling out of that game with a little under 2 minutes. And the other great thing, and we'll talk about the season again, but again, free throws down the stretch. Quentin Gooden 6 for 6, and the Musketeers, I think, actually finished that game 10 for 10 as the Panthers fouled them to try to get back into the game. But it was a great closeout by the Musketeers. Quality win on an opposing court. They hadn't had many true road games. The only other one was Wisconsin. And, some people are picking them to contend for that Missouri Valley championship, especially with Wichita State no longer there.
Yeah. And the great thing and good thing, you're right. Other than Coke, nobody in double digits there for the Panthers. So that strategy worked and probably be a way for other teams to go at it as they move forward, a blueprint for them. And like you say, the great thing is one of the free throws, but also the 3-point shooting. Xavier over 50% from 3-point line against Northern Iowa, 12 for 23. When you're hitting those like that, in fact, their 3-point percentage was higher than their regular field goal percentage. So you got to like seeing that.
Well, and again, here's another point that that's the way Northern Iowa plays. They kind of pack the lane and dare you to shoot over them. And if you can't make your threes, you could be in trouble against them. And, not every team is on every night. But, of course, impressive that the Musketeers could hit enough that night to nail down that win.
Well, that brings us into Big East season. Always here the week after Christmas. We open our presents, and one of them is a beautiful Big East schedule. And like you just mentioned, the Muskies traveled up to the frozen north, up to Milwaukee, and brought home a victory, a scrappy victory on what continues to be the revenge tour, what some people are calling the roadkill tour. Coming across with a 4-point win against the Golden Eagles.
Yeah, and Chris Mack actually last night in his press conference kind of lamented the fact that they had 2 road games on either side of Christmas, and it sounded like I don't even know if his players did go home, if all of them got to go home, but he said they definitely had to practice on Christmas to prepare for that. He said, of course, Marquette had the same schedule to deal with, but, of course, they didn't have the travel day in there. So he kind of took a little shot at the Big East, starting the Big East regular season schedule a little bit earlier than they have in the past. I was looking back. It really started last year, but when they reorganized the Big East, they were pretty much always starting that first game. Happened to be on New Year's Eve, but they've kind of kicked it up a little bit. I did look through down. It does help the Musketeers hopefully down the road. They're going to have a 7-game layoff about a week before the Big East tournament, and that probably be a good time to get some rest. But, again, I said revenge tour. I don't know if you remember. I do because I was there. Up there last year, National Marquette Day, they beat us 83-61. It was a thumping. And then they came back here to the Centos and beat us by 11 points a couple weeks later. So they swept the series, beat us in the Centos, although that was two of those games were part of that 6-game losing streak when Trayvon Blewett was out with some injuries, and we were kind of struggling. And, of course, had lost Edmund Sumner for the year, so Quentin Gooden was filling in and getting some freshman experience. Of course, we look at it now that obviously has paid off this season that he got. I believe I saw somewhere where he actually started 17 games last year after Edmund Sumner got hurt. You got to think if Edmund Sumner wouldn't have gotten hurt, Quentin Gooden wouldn't be where he is today, running this team in a great way.
Yeah, and doing a great job. Hit his free throws as well. Another good free throw game, 22 for 24 from the line. But what I also look at and see it's great is how deep they're going. Only Blewett played more than 30 minutes. Of course, he came away with a big score, but 5 Muskies in double digits, and a couple of them was barely over 20 minutes. And John Marshall just 20 minutes, and Tyreek Jones just 22, and they both ended up in double digits. So they're able to spread the wealth and get a lot of people involved. And this is different from last year, even before Blewett got hurt, where there were times where we had people on the floor going 35, 36, sometimes even 39 minutes a game.
Yeah, you have to, and we're going to get to it again in a little bit here, talk about kind of a mid-season review, but the fact that they go 9 deep. They go 9 deep, and 9 guys are contributing different ways. And even a couple guys that didn't get in double figures, Gates and Cantor, both hit 2 3-pointers last night. And I remember the Cantor one was the key point, which I believe tied the game at about 63 at that point or got them back into it. So, those two, even though they didn't score a lot, they scored some key points. And then the other one, if you remember, if you watched the game, Trayvon Blewett was sitting on the floor with the ball, and he kicked it out to Gates in the corner, and he hit a big 3-pointer, and that was within the last 3 or 4 minutes when they were trying to put that game away.
Mm-hmm. But put it away they did, and you got that first win under the belt in what's always the tough Big East. And the Golden Eagles may not be what they've been in the past, but again, it's sweet to get that repeat, coming back and beating them up the way they did us. But again, their only losses have been to Purdue, Wichita State, and Georgia before last night. And I got a feeling if they can make another run like they did last year at the end of the season, they might be headed back to the NCAAs again.
Yeah, I think I'm glad we got that one out of the way. I think some big teams in the Big East are going to lose in Milwaukee sometime this year. Again, it's a great atmosphere. It wasn't full, but 15,000 people, that's 5,000 more than you have at the Centos Center. And even though the students weren't there, it was loud at times, and that's an intimidating environment, an NBA arena. So, again, I'm glad we got that one out of the way.
Out of the way, and that can move on. Like we said, we want to you may have some final thoughts, but talking about what you call the mid-season review, we're not quite there. 14 games into a 31-game slate, so really the mid-mark falls about right in front of Villanova, but we'll have a lot more to talk about then. So a great time here as we end 2017 with a game on Saturday to sort of look back over these first 14 games and see where they're going. So we'll turn it over to you. You want to start first with what you say are the biggest surprises for you?
Well, the biggest surprise, we've already alluded to a lot of these things that we'll talk about, but number one, I think just the depth. I didn't expect. I'm glad we do, because I just think it makes us so much stronger and more potent. But to go 9 deep, where you really got 9 guys that can play and contribute, and it gives you a little bit more confidence going forward, because you can't see just one injury derailing this team. Because, for example, you got McCure and Gates didn't play against Marshall, but Najee Marshall and Karam Cantor stepped up and started. And, again, before Najee went out at halftime with his injury, they had at one point, I think they were up about 20 points on the Thundering Herd before they made that comeback when we were really shorthanded. So the depth, you hope you get 7 and maybe 8, but again, this might be the deepest in the last 30 years that I've ever seen the Musketeers. Sean O'Mara, I thought Tyreek Jones would be the starter. And he has become the starter, and he has developed. He's very good. I think he actually leads the Big East in field goal percentage. He's shooting over 70%. Of course, most of his shots are from very short range, as they are a lot of them slam dunks. I thought he would be the starter, but I wasn't sure how much Sean O'Mara would contribute, especially with Karam Cantor coming in with a lot of experience. But Sean O'Mara has played great. A lot of times when the other team has a big man, they put him in there to do some banging. He has developed his offensive game. He's getting 6, 8 points a game. He can help out that inside game because Xavier, as they have in many years, they like to play inside out, establish that inside game, and then get people collapsing and then let the three-point shooters take over from there. But you can't do that if you don't have an inside presence. And, again, the three of them have just played phenomenal. And in that one game, I believe the Marshall game, what did we say? They scored over 40 points as a trio. And the other great surprise, and, last year maybe was a big surprise, how they shot so poorly at the free throw line. And this year it has been back to the way we remember Xavier teams, always shooting great free throws, always being able to close games out down the stretch by hitting free throws and being aggressive and getting a lot of free throws. I remember Bobby Knight used to say, if I can make more free throws than you take, I'm going to win the game. And, again, if you look at the stats for the Musketeers, it's usually they're shooting, I believe, over 80% as a team. And I think at one point I saw something where they were ranked maybe fourth in the country in free throw percentage. So, again, that was a big problem last year, and that's improved. You have a big surprise or any?
Well, no, I just go along with just to sort of comment on a couple of things you said here. They go even a little further than 8 deep you're talking about. They really go 10 when you throw in Scruggs and Hart in there at the end. They don't get as many minutes as some of the other guys, but you got there's 10 guys that have played in 10 games, and of course we've already dealt with a couple minor injuries. And I'd agree with you underneath. I mean, you talk about Jones having the field goal percentage, but your praise for O'Mara is well deserved because he actually is shooting better than Jones, both from the floor and free throw. He's actually shooting over 90% from the free throw line. So, yeah, great stuff. And the free throws, which I harped on them a lot last year, that was going to be their weakness. They are much, much improved, as well as shooting, close to 40%, 38.7% from three-point land. And this was a team that was sort of hot and cold in the past from three-point land, but they're hitting it up. And a lot of that, as you just mentioned, is because they've got that presence underneath. And when they don't have it, they're able to kick it out, and some of those threes are a little more wide open than they've been in the past. Yeah,
agreed. Mm-hmm. Moving on, I want to talk about the new players a little bit.
Role and success of new players, and we've got a lot of great things to say there for sure.
Yeah, and at the top of my list is just Najee Marshall. He, in fact, as I'm watching him play the first half of that Marshall game where he started for McCura and made some great drives to the baskets, and actually he can shoot a little bit of the three-pointer. That's kind of been in his game during high school. We saw it a little bit last night and a little bit in the Marshall game. I think as his career goes on at Xavier, we're going to see he's the next superstar, I think, that will come out of Xavier. Here's what you got. You got a 6'7" athletic guy. He could play the top of that 1-3-1 zone, which, of course, McCura plays so well, did last year anyway, but now you got him. He's an inch taller and maybe a little bit more athletic than McCura. Maybe not as much grit. I don't know if anybody has any more grit than JP, but he makes that zone even more intimidating with him out there in the front. And so he's been a great. We thought he would be good. Karam Cantor, again, he got kind of off to a slow start, but I think part of that was just coming into a new team. He played 3 years actually, up at Wisconsin Green Bay, and has a storied career as an international player. But, yeah, you got a 6'10" guy that can step out and shoot threes, and we've talked about before, can play that old man game where he can back you down and find his angle. And he's been a great surprise also, although, that was kind of expected of him. And then Paul Scruggs, probably, if we'd have done this show a couple days ago, I might have said was maybe the biggest disappointment of the newcomers. But last night he put in 5 minutes near the end of the game that gave Quentin Gooden some rest and had no turnovers. And actually in a key point when McCura ran down somebody on a breakaway layup and blocked the ball, and it came back and it got it to Scruggs, and Scruggs saw an opening and drove it in and scored two. It was only 2 points of the game, but came at a very important point. Again, last night he looked like he's finally starting to get it. He's finally starting to catch up with the speed of the college game. He was probably the most touted new guy coming in. I didn't think he actually had played up to his billing, but I'm starting to see it now, and I look for him to maybe just get better and better now as the second half of the season continues. Here's the thing, and if you think about this is just amazing for as athletic he is. He actually is 6'4", but he has a 6'10" wingspan. His arms are long if you look at them. So he also can cause a lot of problems, and I think we'll get even better on the defensive end when you got that extra 6 inches that you can stretch it out, and he becomes a defensive force. Elias Harden, again, he hasn't quite picked it up. He got to play a little bit in the Marshall game. I think he is maybe a disappointment, but again, all these guys aren't going to pan out as they're expected. They only play with one ball, and you can only play 5 at a time. But hopefully in the future, maybe he'll get some time and start to catch up. And I'm sure, and he's one that looks like needs to maybe hit the weights, get a little bit stronger for the college game. He still kind of has that high school body, so to speak.
You are a tough grader, Mr. Reaker. I'll tell you. You got to remember that the Scruggs and Harden, they're just freshmen. They're going to take a little time. And Marshall's a freshman too. There's different levels of them. Got to give them a little time to adjust, like you were just saying. They may not be the freshmen of us. Maybe we're used to that one and done thing or them coming through, but they also had to break into a squad that was, brought a lot of people back from last year, and that's what I like to see about them. Was they're finding a way to fit in, whether it's Najee Marshall and Scruggs and excuse me, and Harden as the freshman, but also Kareem Cantor as the transfer. They've had to find their roles, and this is a great benefit you get from bringing in new people, but also when you have the flow that you can get with a great coach like Chris Mack, who's finding a way to build the team. And I think that's really what he did throughout that tough run in February last year and into the tournament runs, is he emphasized the team. So, I'm with you. There's always a learning curve, but I think these new people are all going to find their way. And as soon as Chris Mack finds which buttons to push, it's going to be quite a squad going down the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm not being hard on him, but yeah, and you make a good point because basically you came back with 5 veterans, especially Quentin Gooden probably would have been the new man if not for the injury to Sumner last year. But really, the starting lineup didn't change too much from what we saw in the tournament. I think actually by the tournament time last year, Tariq Jones was actually starting at the number 5 position. So. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm surprised a little bit that it's just that Paul Scruggs, I read a couple accounts that he may be a one and done. Well, I don't think that's going to be true, but I do in the Xavier tradition of staying 3 or 4 years. I think he's going to be a very, very good player, and I don't think he needs to score to help the team. I think kind of like Quentin Gooden, he really doesn't need to score except if they give him that lane, he's going to take it and lay it in. But other than that, he just has to get everybody else, all the other pieces in position, working together. Then that's kind of back to the old point guard when I was a kid. Point guards didn't score a lot. They just set everybody up. And, of course, that's changed a little bit. You think about Edmund Sumner, who was the point guard last year, but he was also the leading scorer. Sometimes that's tough to do both of those jobs at the same time.
And their future might not be 17, 18. It might be 18, 19 with the talent that's leading with McCurr, O'Mara, Blewett, and Cantor all be off the roster next year. We'll see. So that leads us into your next one, which is the strength of this team. Like you said, we've already sort of hinted at several of them, but just hit on some of the high points here.
Well, just that they're scoring almost 90 points a game. Xavier's always been known for their defense and has always prided themselves on their defense, but this is one of the most talented offensive teams. They can score a lot of different ways, as we've already talked about. So, going forward, I think that the defense will just get better and better. And some people, I think, have said that maybe that is a weakness we'll talk about is their defense. But they're consistently scoring 90 points a game and gone over the triple-digit mark a couple times. The depth, again, we've talked about that, is a strength. The three-point shooting, that goes along with the offense. Here's the thing I really like, maybe the biggest strength of this team, or a couple of them, the chemistry. They seem to work together so well. We see a lot of assists. I think last night they had 23 assists. That's a pretty good number for a team. Shows that they're sharing the ball and working together. Another big strength of theirs happened a couple times last week, is that they've overcome adversity. Down 10 points to UNI in their own place, a tough team, and it didn't faze them. They went on a 10-0 run, tied the game, and then grounded out and won it at the end. And probably the biggest strength they have, and a lot of this was, we didn't know if Trayvon Blewett was going to be back or not, but just the leadership and experience that they have. You got Makira and Blewett, who have played significant minutes for now going on 4 years. You got Kaiser Gates, who's in his second season of playing significant minutes, and Tyreek Jones. They're just a very, very experienced team, and got to be exciting because I think maybe that they can maybe compete with the Villanova Wildcats this year. They kind of look like Villanova a little bit with all the experience and different tools they have available to them.
Yeah, and I said some of those things a little differently. I think one of the things that they do great is spread the wealth. There's no focus on any one player on offense, and if somebody's not having a good day, it seems that somebody's always stepping up. They got a lot of people they can focus on. The free throw shooting we've already talked about, and this probably goes to your chemistry though, but they seem to do really well in tight games. They don't lose their composure. They find a way to win it going down the stretch, as you just said. So lots of good things, but that leads us right into some of the areas that they may need to improve, which aren't many, but they're there.
Well, and the one number one on my list is and something we talked about last year is turnovers. And there's been some games where they've been really, really sloppy with the ball. Actually, the last two games has been interesting, and they've had a lot of turnovers in the first 10 minutes of the game, and then pretty much taken control and controlled the ball. I think last night I heard Max say they ended up with, I believe, 12, but they had 8 in the first 10 minutes of the game, and I think they only maybe had 1 in the second half. And again, that happened at Northern Iowa too. They had a lot of turnovers early, and then they so it seems to be. And he said that at the halftime, both games, he said we got to quit turning the ball over. We can't be giving them easy points. So it looks like they're improving on it, but we'd just like to see that single digit game in and game out. If you look at, again, I hate to bring them up again, but if you look at the Villanova Wildcats, they don't turn the ball over a whole lot, and many of the big successful teams. The defense, again, we already alluded to that, maybe not quite up to par, but I don't have too much concern there because, again, Chris Mack, he knows what he's about. They've used that pack line defense and that 1-3-1 for years, and I think the defense will just get better as the season goes on. And then rebounding. Last night rebounding was a little bit weak. Of course, a lot of that sometimes is when you play that 1-3-1. It's tough to sometimes rebound when you are playing a zone because you don't have a man to match up with to block out. But again, that's something, if we go back to the UC game where they focused on rebounding because they had gotten killed last year by UC in rebounding. And if you remember that game, they significantly out-rebounded the Bearcats. So, again, there's a couple weaknesses there, but I think they're improving on them already. And, again, if you take those things and get better at those things, this could be a special team.
Mm-hmm. You would hope so. I mean, I also put down the rebounding margin, which hasn't been what it's been in the past. I mean, the Muskies used to really dominate on the glass. They still have the edge, but they're not quite doing it the way they have. And that might be a factor in tight games to come if you don't have as big of a rebound margin That means you're probably given second chances, or you're not getting as many chances than you are. The other thing that I'd like to see them improved on is, and we've talked about this in several of our shows, is some of these games are tighter than you'd like to see them to be. I don't know if the Muskies sort of play their level of competition, or they haven't quite fully gelled, or whatever it is. But some of these games, you would think that it shouldn't come down to having to charge back in the last 5 or 6 minutes, that they should have it hardly in hand. And I say that not because of northern Iowa or East Tennessee or anything like that, is I think these are the types of things that are going to cost you in that Big East schedule. Those teams that you need to get up on and stay up on them, if you let somebody in the Big East skip in there, that's when your losses are going to come.
Yeah, especially on the road, if you allow a team to get ahead in their own place and get the crowd into it and the environment, that's where they may be in trouble. And, again, looking forward to Saturday, DePaul. You got to think that's a team that they should be able to put away and win going away from. So hopefully they can improve on that as they come home for that first Big East home game.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that leads us to what you just sort of hinted at is how good is this team? You say it could be pretty special, but and we've talked about this a couple times already. What are your thoughts?
They're right now going forward, and again, it's just you know what can happen. Injury or just get into a slump. But, I just look at it, let's just take it game by game and enjoy every game, but they are enjoyable games. But I've heard in the last week or two, I heard Wojciechowski in his press conference last night. I did watch that this morning. He said, hey, that's a team that can win a national championship right there. And I've heard that, I believe maybe the UNI coach said the same thing. You start to hear more and more of that, and I believe that's the goal. And this might be their best shot they've had in the program history. But again, got to improve on some things. Got to have a little bit of luck. So a key injury or two here or there can change a season like it did last year for a while. So, but right now we just knock on wood and move forward.
Well, I'd say this. I think January is the key to answering that question. They had a terrible February last year, but the Big East schedule is a little different this time around. Like I say, a DePaul team that we should beat. But then, looking at that Villanova game, you got 8 games in January. It's going to do it. By January 10th, when we go to Philadelphia to face Villanova, you could have 2 top 5 teams playing each other, but you just don't want to get caught ahead because you still got to play Butler at home, Providence on the road, and then right after that Villanova game, you've got Creighton, St. John's, Seton Hall, Marquette, then St. John's again. And that St. John's team, I know you haven't been as high on them as I have been, they're going to be a scrappy group. So if they can get through January unscathed or, maybe just a loss, that'll tell us how good they are going into February, because the Big East schedule in February is going to be easier on them. Not really easy because they still got to do Creighton and Seton Hall and Villanova, which are all in the top 25 right now. Of course, Creighton and Seton Hall may not be by the time they play them because they play each other this weekend at 23 and 25. But they're going to play those 3 teams within 8 days right after, Creighton, St. John's, and Seton Hall right after the Nova, so they can't sleep on that. And the other thing that, we didn't talk about, I probably should have thrown in the weakness before throwing it in here, is there's something about those Saturday afternoon games where they're just a little off, and they're going to play Providence, Creighton, and Seton Hall all on Saturday afternoon games, and they just don't seem suited for that. But I think if they come out strong in January, they'll be able to avoid that February swoon and build on that confidence rather than take the step backwards. And that getting through this slate in January will tell us how special this group's going to be.
Yeah, and we got to remember this Big East is a monster. We've said on our other show, I think I said that whoever wins the Big East probably going to have 3 losses. So, I was just checking. They are the number 2 ranked conference now that most of the non-conference games have been played. They have the second highest RPI behind only the Big 12, and we know what kind of basketball gets played in the Big 12. And I was looking on CBS Sports. We look ahead to the bracketology. Of course, it's way too early to look at that. But right now, CBS Sports is predicting the Big East might have 8 bids. And you may think, oh, there's no way. But they do have right now, what I had it down here, 7 teams have double-digit wins already, and 2 others have 9 wins already. Nobody has a losing record. DePaul comes in at 7-6, and if you look at DePaul's who they've played, half of those losses are to pretty decent teams, and they played a couple teams, Oregon and Northwestern. They played very close. Oregon, who I think is 10-3 right now in the pack, out of the Pac-12, beat them in double overtime, and Northwestern only beat them by 2 points. And Northwestern kind of been a disappointment. I think a lot of people thought they were going to be a little bit better in the Big Ten, so they've kind of been down. Of course, that's a rivalry game up in Chicago. So, the Big East is it's a monster. And but I think you're right. I mean, as a Xavier fan, we sit here and say, wow, what if they could run the table in the Big East? I don't even think. And Villanova can't even do that. You're just going into just too tough of environment. I mean, you look at that Marquette team. They got 3 guys that can shoot the lights out. If all 3 of those are hitting their 3-pointers on a day, they could probably beat anybody in the country. And remember last year, they beat Villanova in Milwaukee last year when Villanova was ranked number 1 then. So I think you're right. But I just like this. I like looking one game at a time with this team. I'm not even looking to that Villanova. Let's take care of business. We got 2 home games, and I was looking at DePaul. They actually got a couple transfers. I think they might be a little bit better than they were last year. Hopefully
they are going to be. So let's talk about that game on Saturday. Then the Blue Demons coming into Cintas, 2:00 start time on Fox Sports, and I'm with you. The DePaul coming in, they're not going to be the patsies they've been in the past. They'll probably be one of the lower 2 or 3 teams in the Big East, but this is a veteran squad. They start 2 seniors, 2 juniors, and a very sharp sophomore, and they go 8 deep. And like you were just saying, their losses, those 6 losses, there's nobody that they've dropped to that would be a surprise. I mean, what people don't remember though too is, Georgetown dropped out of that PK 80, and it was DePaul who took their place less than a month ahead of that time, and they did well. They beat Portland State, but those 2 losses, Michigan State and Oregon, and their other 4 losses are to Notre Dame, Illinois, Northwestern, and Villanova. And they've also had some good wins in there, that are going to help build on this. They're still going to be toward the end, but they could be dangerous. This could be a potential trap game if, like you say, the Muskies get caught looking toward that Villanova game in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I looked at their roster and looked at their stats, and the first name I kind of recognized was Eli Kane, 6'6" shooting guard who's been around for a couple of years here. And then I saw 2 names above him in the scoring, and I thought, who are these guys? So I looked them up. They actually had a D2 transfer, a guy named Max Struss, a 6'6" forward who's averaging 17.5 points a game. And so where'd this guy come from? Well, he came from, again, as I said, D2, Lewis University in Romeoville, Illinois. He was actually a D2 All-American. He's their leading scorer. And they picked up one of those grad transfers from Northern Illinois, a guy named, I think it's Marin Maric, who's from Croatia, 6'11". He's averaging 13 points and almost 6 rebounds a game. And actually at Northern Illinois, which is a MAC team, of course, Division I, he was averaging 14 points and 8 rebounds. So this is, I don't want to say it's a trap game, but the Musketeers are going to have to come out. And, again, they can't. And, coming off those 2 big road wins, it could be a letdown. Although I'm very, very happy to say, it kind of surprised me. It's it's a sellout at the Cintas on Saturday. You might not think that would happen with students being out of town, the holidays, but it's a standing room only game. So the Musketeers have caught the imagination of the Cincinnati sports fans.
Well, I hope we'd never be surprised when there's a sellout. I think they should all be sellout. There's so few of them in such a big market as Cincinnati. So lots of things going on, but it's a game that they should win, and that brings us up to the other game that we have to worry about coming up, which is Butler. And this is the team that's, they run a little hot and cold, but I think Laval Jordan is probably just getting to know his squad and what they can do. He, as we've talked a couple times, he came in late with Chris Holton's departure to Ohio State there in the summer, but he doesn't let them quit. I mean, last night, they were down 20 to Georgetown and ended up coming back for a 2 overtime win. They were down 15 to Ohio State in the PK 80. With less than 4 minutes left, and they came back. And this is Butler, the Bulldogs have been there before, but they may not be the team they've been in the past, but they're still going to be a pretty dangerous team.
Yeah, and my only thing I have against Butler right now is I had to go to Fox Go to watch the beginning of the Xavier game because that game going on was a game before, and they wouldn't start the Xavier game on the TV, so I had to pick it up on my phone. But, yeah, look at that Butler team. We know how Butler's going to play. Very, very deliberate, but also they have a lot of very good, skilled players. And here's, look at it. Yeah, coming back against Georgetown. That was at Georgetown, which it looked like they might let that one get out of hand. But their 3 losses, we talk about who teams have lost to, Maryland, Texas, and Purdue. Again, I think I've mentioned before that Purdue team is very, very good. That was probably their worst loss in that, the Crossroads Classic in Indianapolis a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, it's going to be a challenge. Now, fortunately, in the past few years, the Musketeers have kind of had Butler's number. That's been a team that they've been able to take care of. In fact, picked up a Big East tournament win against them last year that probably got them into the NCAA. But again, here's what I'm telling you. Let's take it one game at a time. Let's enjoy every game. Each team's going to bring, a new set of challenges, a new way that we have to beat them. But again, I like Chris Mack. He figures out what he's going to have to do to beat certain teams, to take away their advantages, and he's got the tools and the guys that can execute this year. Last night was Jamal Kane, a freshman, hit 4 3-pointers, and they had talked about they were going to let this kid shoot because he hadn't shot very well from 3-point range. So they basically were letting him shoot, and he started hitting some. And at a certain point, you could go away from your game plan, but they just kept letting him shoot. And in the end, he missed a few, and things worked out. So I like the fact that they have a plan, and they seem to stick to it, even though sometimes adversity arises or things don't go exactly like they think they were going to go in their plan.
Well, that gets us through until the next time we'll be meeting, which will be next Thursday, January 4th, for our next Razorcast. Of course, we'll be on the air on Tuesday with our Trogcast, 2 really old guys talking NCAA basketball. Look for that on the Grueling Truth website. Before we get off and get our trivia and tidbits, you wanted to talk a little bit about whether the Big East should just be the beast.
It is a beast, and I've already mentioned it again. I think ESPN right now says they're going to have at least 6 bids. Again, CBS Sports has got them listed right now at 8 teams. That would just be phenomenal. Of course, the records, they have great records right now, but of course, obviously some of them are going to start to pile up losses because they play each other for the rest of the season. But again, they've kind of set themselves up by being so successful against the non-conference. That's what's very important. You almost always cheer for your fellow conference mates because the more that they win in the conference, the higher your league's going to be rated, and of course that will lead to more teams getting into the NCAA tournament at the end. But, yeah, it is a beast. In fact, another thing I've heard recently on a lot of television broadcasts is I've heard a lot of them say this is getting back to being like the old Big East, when you had, of course, the Syracuse and the UConns, and then, of course, Georgetown and St. John's at their height. In fact, I think this is the highest rating they've had, the Big East, since the 1989-90 season, coming out of the non-conference schedule. So it's been a good year for the Big East, and again, that's great for the Musketeers because basically, you know, if you finish in the top half, you're a shoe-in for the NCAA.
Well, lots of good things. You know, like I say, 2 teams in the top 6, 4 in the top 25. You know, they certainly are worthy of their placement in one of the big 6 leagues for basketball. You throw in Butler and improve St. John's. You know, I think 6 teams to the NCAA are likely, and maybe a 7th depending. Georgetown and DePaul are going to have tough years, but if Providence and Marquette can make late runs like they did last year, it could turn things around for them. But you know, I'm with you, the bracketology and all that, it's like I feel the same way about preseason polls and all that. It's way too early to even start talking about that. Give people like us that have these casts something to talk about, but it's way too early for that. So we'll just have to see as things play out, and that's the way you say, take it one game at a time, so we can't look too far ahead, and that leads us into our trivia and tidbits for the week.
All right, you ready? This is kind of a lightning question. All right, I'm going to give you 3 seconds to answer this question because you have 9 options to answer this question, and you know your 9 options. I know you don't understand what I'm talking about right now, but it'll all come clear when I ask the question. Very quick here, as I always do, try to relate the question to something we're talking about today. And I wanted to go back to New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2013, when the Xavier Musketeers played their first Big East game ever and won. Who did they play, Jeff? 1, 2, 3. Answer.
Providence.
Good. You know, at least you got one of the 9, but no, it was St. John's. And actually, the unique thing about that game was, and actually for the last 3 years, or the first 3 years of the new Big East, they played their opening games always on New Year's Eve, starting at about noon, and all 10 of them played 5 games straight. The Musketeers actually played that game. It started in 2013 and ended in 2014 because they had the last game, and it actually ran over midnight. I think it was a 10 o'clock start. So has the distinction of being started in one year and ended in another. But the Musketeers got their first Big East win over the St. John's Red Storm with a 70-60 score. So, good try.
Good stuff. Good. That relates to a couple of my little tidbits. It was just 5 years ago this month, on December 15th of 2012, that the so-called Catholic Seven made their move and announced that they were going to leave the Big East in 2015. And that led to the negotiations that made the current Big East alignment, starting with those 7 schools, and then they eventually added Xavier, Butler, and Creighton, and made the realignment immediate, which allowed for that first Big East game in December or January of 2000 of the following year. And of course, a lot of the teams that they labeled football schools moved on to other colleges. And a sad note on this date, in 1991, 8 people were crushed to death and 29 others injured at City College of New York at a charity game featuring rap music stars. The start of the carnage in the stairwell wasn't isolated. Part of the issue came from overselling the game. They sold 5,000 tickets to a 2,700-seat arena, and what was labeled as an abundance of gate crashers and autograph seekers. Unfortunately, the people in the back, though they realized the crisis and tried to move back and pull others out of the mass, they were not in time to save the lives of those people. And on this day in 1905, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was founded. You may go, what? At that time, 62 institutions belonged. 5 years later, it took on their new name as the National Collegiate Athletic Association, what we call the NCAA. which now oversees close to 500,000 students in almost 1,300 institutions. And in 2014, the NCAA generated close to $1 billion in revenue, and 80 to 90% of this was brought in by the men's Division I basketball tournament. And we would be remiss if we didn't, as we did last week, to wish a happy 48th birthday to Coach Mack, who will turn that shortly before this Saturday's game with DePaul. Okay. And so we'll end there. Our last Razorcast of 2017. We'll be back on the air next Thursday. All the things that are happening in Xavier basketball and the Big East. And until then, as always, we say,
Go Muskies!